Okay, folks, so I'll start again. I'm David Bowen. I'm a member of First United Methodist in Boise, Idaho, also known as Cathedral of the Rockies. And I also support the missions team and chair the Love Beyond Borders campaign. I was really excited when Courtney contacted me about the possibility of having a curriculum for Love Beyond Borders. I've had several experiences where engaging youth around an initiative has really had a dramatic impact. And not only engaging them in terms of a specific current initiative, but kind of raising up another generation of young people who can not only participate in, but eventually then lead these kinds of initiatives. So I just loved it that Courtney took the initiative on that. As some of you probably know, Reverend Courtney is a United Methodist pastor and a missionary with Global Ministries. Her current appointment is the mission advocate for the Western jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church. Her background is in teaching, makes sense, math and science, and as well as a passion for service learning, which is what then was behind her interest in helping us with this. So I'll leave it at that and let Courtney say a little bit more about herself. Oh, and let me just add, because we are recording this, Courtney would like to have it be a little bit interactive. Please use the raise your hand option, or if you're not familiar with that, just raise your hand, and I will try and help to facilitate the conversation. And alternative, you can also feel free to put questions in chat in case the conversation is moving right along, and then we'll circle back to them when the time's appropriate. All right, thank you very much. Courtney, please take it away.
Thank you, and I appreciate, I know that some of you are in different time zones, but regardless, for most of us, this is the end of the day. So I appreciate your willingness to be here. My name is Courtney Randall. Thank you, David, for the introduction. I am a pastor, I'm also a teacher, and I'm really passionate about service learning, about helping children and youth understand the why behind what we do in service and ministry. I want this to be interactive, so I want to be able to get a sense a little bit of who you are as we go into this. We'll talk about the curriculum, kind of want to talk about some of the ideas behind the curriculum and go through it a little bit. Like any curriculum, it is a work in progress, and it's meant to be adapted to the context where you serve. So I thought I would start off with, and you can think about it for a couple of seconds, but I'd like to hear from you. Who is a teacher, a faith teacher that has made an impact in your life? And maybe in a sentence, why? I'll start, because it's always that awkward thing, like you need a little bit of time to do this. And if you don't feel like contributing, that is totally fine. But I grew up in the Methodist Church in Chagrin Falls, Ohio. And Mr. Beatty was my Sunday school teacher. And he was a jeweler by trade, but he was a man of great patience. And we could never ask the wrong question, because he was always patient enough to take any kind of question we had. And so his way of being a faith leader has continued to leave an impression on me many, many years later. Anybody else want to share? Could be a Sunday school teacher or a youth leader.
My name's Dodie Hansen. I grew up in the Methodist Church too, and I went to a lot of camps. And my camp counselors there were great for my faith formation. And I really appreciated their fun, creative, and progressive view on things, and also that they were really into service, and that was great. Courtney, I think you're muted.
I was just going to see it. I didn't see anybody else. Anybody else have someone? It can be.
I'll jump in with one.
Okay, go, David.
Actually, unlike many of you, I grew up in the Presbyterian Church in New England, and youth leader there really just had a heart for and a sense of how to care for the vulnerable among us. And they weren't big projects. We would go down south. We did things a lot of youth groups do. We painted orphanages. We would do cleanup projects in different parts of the city. But it was the passion he had behind that and explain why it's important to do these things that really had an impact on me.
Go ahead, Emily.
So, hi, I grew up in the United Methodist Church in a little town called Artesia, California. And my youth leader was Reverend Ed Bloomfield. And he was the kind of person that you would never guess would be a clergy, I guess, if you were going to have to stereotype them back in the 60s. But he was always gentle, yet enthusiastic. And he always had a message that you couldn't lay down unless you talked it through or, thought it through and came back together. We did a lot of things around campfire back in the days when the parks had campfire circles still. So I have the warmest feelings for him. And it turns out, unbeknownst to me, his wife, who he married later, was actually one of my eldest sisters in nursing school with her years before. And so it was kind of, this kind of like we're all related, that 6 degrees of separation. And I still think of him today when people ask me about someone who made a difference besides my mama in my life and my faith. Thank you.
Well, I can go as well. I grew up Catholic. I'm Catholic. So I didn't have a youth leader, but when I was in college, I met a very positive priest. And when I mean positive, someone who was very open and someone who, like Emily said, you wouldn't think they were clergy. And someone who grounded me in meditation, grounded me in the present moment, grounded me in Christ, and grounded me in love and compassion. And he's been such a positive influence in me. And thanks to him, I would say that I continue to practice my faith. And I think those leaders and those spiritual mentors are the driving force of our faith. If it wasn't for them, maybe we wouldn't be even here tonight. So I really appreciate everyone who's doing this work.
I realize it's an interesting situation to ask a bunch of people that may or may not have met each other to share something. And so I will also put it on a tab. If you want to share with me later, that's totally fine. I think one of the things that this brings up is that it is the relational understanding that make it. I'm going to share a curriculum, but really a curriculum is just words on the paper that really come alive when it's the people that inspire it. And what makes it genuine and real is whatever you bring. And I think, one of the best things we can do is just bring who we are to any kind of initiative that it takes, especially when it's something that we're trying to teach. Maybe we're a seasoned teacher. Maybe this is a new experience. Maybe this is a new direction. And I bring that as this understanding that Jesus gives us the gift of who we are to make whatever a curriculum is. It's a guide. Right. As I mentioned before, I've been doing service learning. The first service learning curriculum I did was as an AmeriCorps volunteer in Chicago, Illinois, doing anti-gang programs in the South Side of Chicago. And then I became a United Methodist missionary to Latvia and wrote a curriculum in Latvia because there weren't a lot of Latvian language-based curriculum. I did not know that much Latvian at the time. And then I was serving a local church, and it was a smaller local church in New England, and we couldn't afford the Cokesbury curriculum. So we just came up with our own, and it was all service learning based initiatives and mission and ministry. And we had third graders and fourth graders that could tell you about community mapping and mapping, asset-based mapping and how to read your community. And it was incredible. And it brought so much life into our church. And so I think that's kind of where this came from. And Emily helped introduce me and get me into this understanding of what Love Beyond Borders is really doing. And so I think what is really exciting about this is realizing it is a collaborative effort, that the United Methodist Church gets to partner with Unicef and gets to partner with COVAX and do something that's really bringing about change, but also bringing about awareness. So I'm going to start, and at any time, if you have a question or you need me to slow down, maybe can I just see a show of hands? How many of you got the curriculum? Do you all have it? Okay, thanks, David. Like I said, it is a work in progress. You know, I mean, when you start to write a curriculum and you say, well, here's my range, it is designed probably on the upper end of elementary school through youth, but it can be adapted. And I'm willing to sit with anybody that wants to be able to figure out how to adapt it. I also acknowledge that we're still in the midst of coming out of a pandemic. So some of you are meeting virtually. Some of you are meeting in person. Some of you have hybrid. So we're going to talk a little bit towards the end about what does it look like to adapt that to the current context that we're in. I'm a teacher, but I'm also a mother of 3 kids. We have a 5-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And every day I open an email to see if my kids are going to school or not. So this is kind of the world we're living in. So the idea behind this curriculum is that it's supposed to be adaptable. And when I started thinking about a curriculum, I kept thinking about what do I keep seeing all over the house? Well, I keep seeing boxes, Amazon boxes, mostly of things that are arriving at our house. And that's kind of where it started from, this idea. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea behind this service learning curriculum. And then we can talk about questions about how we implement it. It is called Out of the Box Curriculum. I used to teach geometric construction as a middle school math teacher, and it was all about taking apart shapes. And so when I look at the world around me, it helps me to understand shapes. And so looking at all these boxes that have ended up on our doorstep through the course of COVID helps me to think about, well, what do boxes do? What do they hold? How can they be taken apart? And as we are looking at what they look like taken apart, we have the shape, right? And it ends up being the shape of a cross. And so I thought about if we're going to talk about service learning as a way, as an approach, what is Love Beyond Borders all about? And what is really at the middle of this curriculum? And it really is this understanding of love God and love neighbor, right? This is a Wesleyan understanding, but it permeates through all our Christian traditions. It's not specific to Methodism, but I think that is where, growing up in the Methodist Church, that's where I understood that. And one of the things that I think we often talk about is we talk a lot in church about loving our neighbors, and it becomes very close, right? When we're younger, we know that our neighbors live next door to us. But when we're talking about God's understanding of loving our neighbor, it's our neighbor throughout the whole world. So when we talk about how we love God, is how we love our neighbors, right? And how do we care for and stand in solidarity with our neighbors who are on the other side of the world? How many of you have an idea of a missionary or know somebody that's serving in another part of the world? Connie, you can't answer this because she's a mission advocate and a missionary for China. So other than that, can you guys name a mission? Can you think of any missionaries that you know of that are serving somewhere outside of the United States? Okay, we'll get back to that later, right? So, one of the things that we have to do is there are people serving throughout the world, but they're also our brothers and sisters or our siblings that are serving throughout the world. So the idea of this whole understanding of love beyond borders is realizing that when God calls us through Jesus Christ to love our neighbors, there's no border that says it's just next door, right? The concept then is that we are to care and be aware of what's happening to our brothers and sisters in many different parts of the world, especially as it impacts with COVID. And so that is kind of the central point for all of this. It's the why of what we do. Why should we care? Why is God asking us to love? This is kind of the common theme, right? Why should we get involved? And it gets to that. When we look at, and we'll talk about it in a little bit too, there's some really incredible, powerful stories that Unicef has released. You see some incredible stories through the Love Beyond Borders page that talk about some of the things that maybe we need to be aware of when it talks about the inequities during this COVID pandemic, right? And so learning what is going on with our neighbor is a way that we are aware of what our neighbor is going through during this time. So that's the understanding of it. It starts from there, right? And you'll see throughout the curriculum, hopefully, that theme keeps coming back, loving God and loving neighbor, and that both and, right? We love God by loving our neighbor. We love our neighbor demonstrates that we are loving God. And on that is built, so on that comes out of this understanding of prayer and social justice. You often hear that we talk about prayer as a way of understanding what is going on that leads us to action, and our actions to lead us back into prayer. So this understanding of social justice is being aware of what is happening in the world, being aware of places where injustice is happening. And so how do we get youth and children to understand this? Well, we talk about something that's all around them, right? Everyone has been affected by COVID in some ways, right? You know, it's changed, it's disrupted us. But what happens when that enters an issue of justice, right? When that comes into play where countries that have more money have more access to healthcare? How are these issues of injustice playing out in countries that don't have the same access to healthcare and don't have the same access to vaccines or vaccine supplies? Right? It's one thing to have access to vaccines, but what if you don't have the syringes to distribute the vaccines? Right? And so that is where this understanding of social justice and prayer, and I think prayer is really an important part of it. When we're teaching young people how to pray, you know, the more information we can share with them, the prayers are. You know, it's one thing to say, I'm praying for my brother and sister in a certain country. It's another thing to watch a video clip of what it looks like firsthand, to hear of some of the struggles or some of the ways that this has actually happened. And all of a sudden there's a name, there's a physical place, there's a country that maybe some of the youth have never heard of before. And it enriches our prayer life because it allows us to get to know our neighbor that much better. And all of a sudden the world doesn't seem so large. It starts to understand these connectionalism, right? And as Methodists or as Christians as a whole, we hear about those connectionalisms, right? We hear about the ways those connections are impacting us. And we're also learning about the connectionalism within this movement. Love Beyond Borders is a partnership, right? We can't do what Unicef can do, right? And COVAX has, so each player has an important part to do this. So this is another way of education. You know, UNICEF has been delivering vaccines. All right, Alex, how long? Like, I'm putting Alex on the spot, right? Alex, how long has UNICEF been delivering vaccines throughout the world?
Well, UNICEF USA started in 1947, so decades, really.
Okay.
And we vaccinate close to half of the world's children every year.
Mm-hmm. So you think about that, half of the children already, you know, so there are systems in place. There are ways to distribute. They have ways of going into cultures and understanding cultural understandings about vaccines and how to distribute and do all of that. And in partnership with COVAX, so that there is a way of understanding how to get the vaccines, how to get them distributed. So it's also that social justice piece is also this understanding of collaboration. Right? And then it comes, well, what's the role of the church? So that gets to the three parts at the top of the cross. The role of the church right now in the midst of this love beyond borders is really, and this is where, David, I appreciate this. This is huge to service learning and to understanding our faith, making people aware, advocating, and contributing, right? If people are not aware of the situation, they're not aware of the need, right? They're not aware, and they're not going to know what to do. So part of it is equipping the children and the young people to be aware of what's going on, to being aware of all the underlying layers that go into this movement and into why it's needed, to be able to truly understand what is happening in the world. If I want to schedule a vaccine, I call up Walgreens. It doesn't cost me anything. I have a car, I drive. What about people in places where there's not adequate transportation? What about in places where, medical, there's a lot of things that go into it. So awareness is key, right? Like awareness is making our eyes open to the larger problem and to being able to understand and name some of the inequities that are happening and all the things that come after that, right? That are a result of that. I won't go into a lot of advocating, right? How do we teach young people to have a voice and to know how to use their voice and to be comfortable speaking out, right? It's really frightening to be able to talk in a situation where you're listening to somebody that may have misinformation. And COVID has a lot of, around the COVID pandemic, there's a lot of misinformation. So how do we encourage young people and children to be advocates? How do we encourage them, knowing what they're aware of, how do we encourage them to use their voice in powerful ways? We see it all the time. Look at the young people and their involvement in the climate justice issues. They found their voice. How do we encourage young people that are connected to the church or involved in the church or some way that their voice has meaning, that their voice counts, and that they have something to say? And I think when you look at making young people and children aware and helping them find their voice, they know best how to contribute. The Love Beyond Borders is a way to be able to get supplies. But I think the best way we understand contribution is bringing who we are, and so there is a part of this that is fundraising, but I don't think it's just that. I think it's being able to say, here's a way we can help. And here's a way that we can contribute using who we are. And I think there's a lot of incredible things that go in with allowing young people to fundraise themselves, to come up with the idea, to come up with the plan, to use the gifts they're given, to be able to do that. I served in a church with a lot of introvert kids. And for 4 years, we put on a readathon. And they sponsored over that course of 12 students in the school of Padhar in India by reading, because they knew they couldn't, they weren't comfortable doing a skit or a show, but they could sit in a room and they could read. 12, a group of kids that raised over $1,200 by reading, because they said, I can get people excited about reading and I can tell them why I'm reading. And so I think it's allowing the gifts of the children to be able to help figure out how they can contribute. All right, I've done a lot of talking. I apologize. When you give a pastor a microphone, it's kind of like when you give a mouse a cookie, they just keep going with it. So I realize that some of you might have questions or comments or points of clarification. I'm gonna, at this point, do that and then come back to talking about some ways to edit or adapt. Are there questions or comments that you have or points that need to be cleared? You can't all be that quiet.
Well, I appreciate you pointing out that contribute can mean many different things. It doesn't have to mean only digging into your own pocket, but creating activities to get other people involved and helping them to contribute is also, very important. So I appreciate that you highlight that.
How about this? Tell me about where you're serving, or tell me about where you're volunteering. How does this need to be adapted? Dottie, go ahead.
My name's Dodie, and I'm the Director of Education at First United Methodist Church in Eugene. I work with our volunteers and go all the way from preschool up to high school. I think one of the things that I'm thinking about that I'm always doing is I'm writing my own curriculum a lot because we have a very progressive theology. I have not found very many curriculums that match our church's theology. And so, and the ones that I have found did not have the things that I like to teach with, which is usually for elementary is a story, a Bible reference, a Bible reference, a life application story, I should say, or a social justice story that goes along with it, with visuals, with pictures, and then a game that's active, and a craft that can be tied in. And we also love, if we can ever get it, service projects that they can actually do with their hands and feel like they're doing it. But that's my elementary type thing. In the olders, the middle school and high school, we usually start out with an active game that kind of pertains to like some discussion afterwards about what it was. And then we go into a discussion and maybe a PowerPoint or something that has to do with the subject. And then we kind of have a business meeting for what is our next service project type of thing. So just kind of structure that I deal with every day. That's what I'm doing.
How many of you right now are meeting in person? Some? Okay. Yeah, Judy, you're meeting in person, Patricia. Okay. I think one of the great challenges too is that we're noticing, and there's some research showing it, how do we come out of the isolation and what do we look like in the midst of that? So Dottie, I appreciate you sharing. I'm writing a lot of this down. I can find ways to be able to adapt this a little bit more towards that structure as far as that's going. I think one of the things that I'm excited, and I'm going to talk to Alex more about, is that Unicef has developed some really incredible video clips. So I also think one of the things that we do is we use our partnership well. Because I think one of the things that makes service learning come alive is hearing the stories and looking what is innovative about it. And how does that play out? You know, and when we make service alive is usually when we can hear the stories. So let's use those opportunities to hear the stories as much as possible and to find stories that are age appropriate. Some of the stories, statistical stories that are maybe a little bit harder for younger elementary will be really might hit home with an older population. I think that is great. And I think it's great. Like you said, anything that's hands-on, that's active, does much better. And even among the, I've done youth ministry for over 20 years. You give a senior high, like something silly to do that has a meaning behind it, and they will grab onto it and they will run with it. I think the service learning projects that have the biggest impact have the biggest buy-in when it comes to planning. So I think that it's great whenever a youth program lets them have a voice in how it's planned, right? Like, I think those are the things that make it really worthwhile. And I think that's that contribution, when we know our gifts and when others recognize the gifts within us, it makes it so much easier for us to do something that comes out of the gifts that we have, right? And not every youth, and you've seen this in youth groups and in Sunday school room, there's personalities, right? They have a group personality sometimes. And there are different personalities as they age, and what works with one grade may not work with another grade. And so learning how to really use those gifts, and that's what God gives us, right? Helps to make the contribution really an offering. And I think that's really important. When it is a contribution out of our God-given talents, it really is an offering to the world and to the church. So thank you, Dottie. I can work on that. I could definitely work on framing some of that differently. And I'd love to talk with you more about that, because that can definitely be done. Yeah. Those of you that are meeting in person, are you back to full groupage? Like, are people returning?
I need to clarify a bit.
Yep.
We are meeting in person outside.
Okay,
And so we don't have Sunday school. Pastor does a mini sermon with the children.
Okay.
But we have tried to create some activities that would work for the whole family, more like stations. Right after the service or in between. We do have an indoor service now. It's masked and no music or
okay.
no singing, let's put it that way.
And Patricia, where are you?
We're in Kuna, Idaho.
So one of the other things that came to mind too is especially if some groups are hybrid, if this idea is out of the box, can you have a curriculum that can adapt and then the box adapts? You know, one of the things that I have thought that I've often done before, you know, how many of you ever remember shoebox altars? Did you guys ever do that where you took a shoebox and it was an altar and you put it out and it was a kit that you would, maybe not. Okay, well, the idea behind that is what if it would look like that this box changes? You know, if a family could take a box home and the sessions could be broken up in a way that would allow for maybe a family to have these conversations, a family to, you know, to be able to unpack a box and to learn about what they can do. You know, how would it make them more aware? And how could these boxes then change? And so each week, you know, if you're meeting outside, they bring back the box as part of their offering. And then the boxes get refilled. And it's a way of offering, you know, sometimes when we talk about offering, you know, it is important and there's a need for funds, but what if we're offering this idea of service learning? And each week there's a way to, and most of the things in this curriculum was supposed to be designed so it didn't cost a lot of money. So what would it look like maybe that each week they'd offer and bring the box back or bring it back? Or, you know, there's a way. I have a couple of volunteers that have worked with me over service learning, and they're my go-getters. They love shopping and they love distributing, you know, and sometimes that's what they can do. And so, you know, what if there's somebody who's just really good at delivering boxes, you know, and they want to be involved, but maybe they have certain things. Well, that's a great job for them to do. They can help restock the boxes and deliver them, you know, and it depends. You know, I realize some churches might have large programs and that's a logistics, but I also think it invites more people to be involved. And if somebody's going to be the distributor, they're going to want to know what's in it. And so it's another way of making more people aware of what's going on and what Love Beyond Borders is really all about. And, you know, and we also recognize that there's different levels of what people are comfortable with during COVID. And so, you know, some of it can be sent, but it can also be it can be used in this idea of the box, and the box can go and the box can travel. And I know for some of you that seems like might seem like more work, but I think it's also an invitation to allow more people or more adults or more youth to get involved. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions for you, you know, as a part of a curriculum, it also depends on, you know, I tried to put more than one activity. If you're going to use it in a Sunday school, right, you have a restricted amount of time. Pick the activity that speaks most to you. Sometimes it's also knowing the personality of a group. There are some groups that just can't sit still very long. So, you know, it also is supposed to be adapted. You know, take it and put whatever the mark of or the personality of the group that it adjusts to. That's part of the reason behind it. There's some format that's somewhat similar that begins with a prayer and ends with a prayer, but beyond that, I think the idea behind it is also to adapt to the amount of time that you have. We've done service service lock-ins before. You know, like, and I don't know if you've ever done the, what is it? 24-hour, no, the famine. Stacy, can you tell me how many, I should know this, how many hours?
30-hour famine.
Thank you. All right. It was on the tip of my tongue, the 30-hour famine. But what if you took the cost of, what if you made, instead of a 30-hour famine, give me a second, I'll get the, how much does it cost to get one? You equate the cost of how much it costs to get a set of vaccine, was it 34 hours? And make it a 34-hour shut-in. You know, and that might not be something now, that might be something depending on where you are and how comfortable people are staying in one area. But what would it look like to be able to do it in one setting and make it a longer approachable thing? There's ways to adapt that. Those have been powerful overnights. We've done those with service learning as it deals with homelessness and deals with food insecurity. It's another great way to be able to kind of expand that and just adapt it with the different sections of it. Other questions or comments? Oh, Connie, before I forget, here's another good way to use it. Confirmation class. So I think one of the things that's really cool is sometimes confirmation classes have to come up with a project, right? What if their project comes out of Love Beyond Borders? What if their confirmation project about putting faith into action has to deal with this introduction to social justice as it relates to inequities and a really large social justice problem in our world, and allows them to go layers and layers deeper. Because once we find is, you know, COVID-19, what it's done is it's just shined a magnifying glass on some of the incredible discrepancies in the world, right? And so what we've seen is that you start, all these ideas intersect, and they are going to be for a while, right? You know, it's opened up a lot of really, a lot of different layers. And so being able to have that and be able to have those conversations. Yes. So that's a good, and Emily is on the call too. We talked a lot about what if things worked really well with Imagine No Malaria, right? And how powerful that is. Thank you, Judy and Flo. I see that, you know, and so a lot of what's difference between Imagine No Malaria and COVID is Imagine No Malaria was incredibly powerful. Most kids in the United States had to have another layer of understanding when it came to malaria, because most of the kids in the United States don't suffer from malaria, right? One of the things that's different with the COVID, you know, is that there has been ways in which children and youth have been impacted by COVID. And so I think that gives it a different level of understanding, right? Of being able to do that, and in a space where they can talk about it. One of the things that I think is really important, and the role that the church can play, is let's talk about the things that we're not talking about. You know, let's talk about questions people have with, or young people might have about COVID, that they don't feel safe spaces to ask for a variety of different reasons, or people assume that they should know. You know, part of the awareness is also giving them space to ask the questions that they may still have. And being able to ask those questions in a place where people aren't going to be made fun of, where people are not going to be made to feel like they don't know something. That awareness comes there. You know, a lot of times also awareness, I have found, allows us to say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you, right? Like, I don't think that any of us are experts on anything, but I think if we can teach our young people and our children to say, it's okay to say, I don't know, but I will get back to you, that we provide a safe resource. And, you know, and there's still a lot of things that we're still continuing to know about COVID. So I think Vacation Bible School, Imagine No Malaria, right? There were some very powerful things that came out of that. And this is kind of the idea of, there's a lot of carryover from Imagine No Malaria to this Love Beyond Borders. All right.
Courtney, could you say a little bit more about that in terms of, you know, discussing this with children? How would you introduce it? Would you be open-ended and just say to them, what do you hear about the pandemic? What do you hear about the virus? Or how would you do that?
So one of the things I think that I've found in talking to children and youth about COVID is being able to for everyone to start with their story. And being able to share from their perspective of what it was like. And when we start sharing from our story, then it allows us, and when we share from our story, it listens for the questions that may come up in that sharing. Because I think what we can do is, if as adults we can listen well, we can hear the questions that maybe are coming in through the unspoken, right? When COVID first happened in the town that I was serving in, half of the nursing home died in the month of March and April. Now, this is a small town, but our church witnessed my husband and I doing last rites to a member of our congregation who had, her family helped Jews escape during World War II, and she survived all of this. And we watched her, like watching through the glass. And so we had to find ways for our kids to talk about what this was like when they had witnessed someone they loved very early on and the doors close and all of that. So what we do is we find ways for them to share about their story and listen for the things that are being said or maybe aren't being said. And as we listen for that, I think that's where we hear their fears. That's where we hear their uncertainties. And in telling their stories, then we can hear about ways in which we can share. And some of it, there are ways in which science, I think, helps provide really good information. I believe, I'm a science teacher, right? I believe that it is okay to have faith in science in the same room. I think it's also okay to say that what we know and what we don't know about it. I think it's okay to ask questions and to have them be able to do that. And at the beginning of any discussion, say, there might be some things I don't have the answer to, but let's sit with it together and let's find out what the answers are. Because I realize that sometimes in our Sunday school classes and in our church, we're not all of the same mind. We may have different approaches to the vaccines. We may have different approaches to the boosters, right? And so there's a way in which we can acknowledge that and hold that, and yet enter into a larger conversation about what it looks like to hear our stories and to hear our neighbors who we love, their stories on the other side of the world. And so I think those ideas of stories connecting to each other is okay. And I always think in regards to faith and science, it's always okay to say, I don't know. I don't know if that is a helpful way of clarifying how we talk about it. But I think there's also, we always claim it's sacred space, and we allow young people to tell their stories and hear what they're saying and what they're not saying.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And if I can ask a follow-up question, and then I'll be quiet so others can jump into questions. You mentioned this great stories out on the Unicef website. We have some stories on our Love Beyond Borders website. Do you see a way you would use those stories with children?
Mm-hmm. So one of the ways that we can use the stories is allow the kids to read them and retell them. So the other ways that we can do that is, one of the things I think is great on the website, Love Beyond Borders, always have a map, give them a location, like for a lot of these, as we talk about things about loving our neighbors across the world, I think it's really important that we know where that is. For some of them, it's great. You can talk about a country and they know exactly where it is. But, when we talk about a place, and sometimes it's helpful to locate that story in a place, and that gives a child a connection to that. And so there's a great story recently about on the UNICEF website about Malawi. Is that right? That Alex can check this on me. But the innovative ways of getting the vaccine there, and so hearing that story, thank you. Hearing that story, letting them either watch it or see it, and then locating it. If this is love beyond borders. Let's figure out where the different places in the world these stories are coming from, and getting a sense of what it's like. And you know what's great about that is you can say, oh, look, you know what? Look how close they are to the equator. They're this close to the equator. What do you think like the heat is going to do? How do you think that's going to disrupt distribution? How do you think that's going to make it harder or easier? Or what does it look like that this is the wet season? You know, what does it look like right now that they're in Nepal, and right now there's some flooding? You know, like being more informative helps the stories to really come alive, helps us to also acknowledge some of the challenges that are there, that exist. You know, what does it look like to be able to get into certain areas where there's a lot of natural disasters that are going on? There's a lot of political unrest. There are a lot of layers into it that makes it difficult to get some of the vaccines there. Yes, so if you notice, Alex is really on top of it. He's putting them in the chat box, and we can follow up with that. But how do you make stories alive, right? Put a person, put a name, put a place on it. And when you pray at the end, remember the names. You know, there's somebody in their group, I guarantee, that has a great sense of names, right? Let somebody be a name keeper. That's one of my favorite things. All I want you to do tonight is recall all the names, write them down. So when we say our prayer at the end, you're going to remember every name. I'm a big fan of Post-it notes. Having them be the name keeper. So, and when you pray at the end of the night, they'll remember all the names that have come through. And so it's not just, this is your neighbor, but this is your neighbor's name. And that makes a difference. And you know, also encourage them. Names in different parts of the world are not always easy. So try to have them listen, but also be okay if they don't say the names exactly right the first couple times. Trying to say different names is very difficult. I would know we named our daughter Kira, and nobody can get it. So we get that names from different parts are difficult to be able to do.
I've
Yes,
a
Flo.
question.
Mhm.
Yeah, and this might be directed to Alex too. You use the terms in all this interfaith movement, and I'm involved with interfaith in the place where we are, and also ecumenical with some very like-minded churches that work together. And I just wondered, is there anything, and I just see this being very adaptable with the people that I know and the folks that I know. But I wondered, is there any other faith traditions that are working this, that are, developing curriculum? Like, so can I say to my Muslim sisters, yeah, I know you've got your summer camp going on. We've got our summer camp going on. We've done things before. Is there anything coming out of, that particular faith tradition? Or my Jewish, sisters, do you have anything? Or, I can see, and I know we can adapt it easily because we have the relationships, but I just wondered, other resources, or are there out there? And what, when you say interfaith, what that means?
Sure, I'll just jump in. I think that's a really good question, and something that I've been so inspired by, and my colleague Austin as well, is just how wonderful it's been to bring different faith communities together for this common goal of vaccinating the most vulnerable. And I can say that, I'm so thankful for this panel, for this conversation, and for the United Methodist Church for leading in this effort. But I can also say that we've had wonderful leaders within the Buddhist community with Buddhist Suu Kyi Foundation. We've had the Mennonite World Conference partnering with us on this effort. We've had Olam, which will launch the campaign in a couple of weeks. It's a Jewish organization. And we have also Muslim organizations partnering with us. Now, I don't know if they are putting together a curriculum, but what I can say is that, and this is something that David brought to my attention, and my Catholic roots come out here as well. When we talk about social justice, I think that's something that's so common with so many faith groups, with the Jewish faith, with tzedakah, puha nefesh. I mean, there's just such a common trend with these faiths and with other denominations that I think we can tie it tie it all together. That's
Yeah,
the
and-
central message.
Yeah, and I guess the question I have is, so I would want to know, I appreciate you telling me and naming the Jewish program, and if you know the names of the Muslim groups that are connected to it and all, I mean, that would just be real helpful because, as we talk as adults, and I can say, yeah, Iman, I heard about, and she'll say, oh yeah, I know that organization. And, then we have that trust there kind of thing. So I just, where I could find those information or, how I can
Yeah.
access that.
There are Muslim organizations like Ifanka that have given to the end of pandemic effort, which is this interfaith movement. There's also the Muslim American Leadership Alliance.
Okay.
And so those will be the two that come to my mind. But I will now on the chat box paste the link of the website, of the campaign website, and you will find the list of all organizations that are
okay.
partnering with us.
Okay, I can do that. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and one idea I had, once we have the final curriculum formatted, and our friends at Unicef are really helping us with that, then I was going to talk with Courtney about sharing that with representatives from different faith groups and invite them to give us some feedback. How would we adapt this so it's usable in your faith context? And because we really want to be a resource across all faiths.
And Courtney, if you need any resources for that, we really have a strong Jewish, Christian, Muslim group, and you can contact me. And we work with a masjid and others, and we could maybe even, we've done things together before. So.
Well, Courtney, may I direct a question to Alex, and then
Yes.
maybe we'll take another 5 minutes to wrap up. But Alex, if I return this around for a moment, could you say a little bit, why would UNICEF be interested in a curriculum, like this? How does this useful, or how does it advance UNICEF's work?
Sure, David. I think that's a really important question. UNICEF has a long-standing tradition of working with faith-based organizations. UNICEF wouldn't be able to vaccinate half of the world's children every year by itself. We partner with many different faith groups to get the job done. And I think what's really important about this curriculum is that we talk about how the pandemic affects older people and more vulnerable parts of our population. But we really sometimes miss how it affects children. And what I want to show and just point out some statistics, and they are a little bit outdated from when the pandemic started and when we were at the peak of the pandemic. But just imagine that, think about that 1.6 billion children were out of school in 2020. I mean, that's staggering. That really has set back progress around the world in education and poverty. And it also affected, for example, nutrition. It puts 6.7 million additional children at risk from death from severe malnutrition. It also caused 80 million children to miss on life-saving routine vaccinations. Because this pandemic really, not only does it cause a lot of damage to the whole community, it also doesn't allow routine vaccinations to keep being carried out. And routine vaccinations, meaning polio, measles, I mean, these diseases that in the US we've conquered, but around the world, we're still struggling with. And so those are just a couple of statistics, and not even to mention the effect on young girls and women, that it caused spikes on young marriages and young girls getting married too early. And when a young girl gets married too early, she misses out on education, she misses out on continuing her own well-being, overall well-being. So that's just a glimpse. There, I could keep talking and talking about the negative effects that COVID-19 has had on children. But I think it's paramount that we bring this home to them, that we talk to them in a, obviously, in a less dramatic way and in a more comprehensible way, how this affects them and hearing them out. And I think the fact that there is a curriculum that addresses this shows the leadership within faith communities, that this is addressing the pandemic in all groups, in all demographics of the faith community. And also, we listen to children a lot. You know, as Jesus said, be like the little ones. You know, children are the most innocent and the most precious among us. You know, they know everything. They know a lot more than we do, in my opinion. And, you know, if a child hears that their neighbor doesn't have a vaccine, they're probably like, why does he or she not have a vaccine? And you, Dad, were able to get it. They just get it. And we listen to them. And I think, you know, they're also leaders in that sense. And if we can educate them and spread that message of social justice, I think, Courtney, you're so right. This is way beyond the pandemic. This is really a point of how we can change the culture within not only the Methodist Church, but within all communities, all faith communities. So that's just my 2 cents around that.
Thank you, Alex. Well, Courtney, did you have some closing comments, or do you want to take also a moment and see if anybody had any burning questions?
If you're welcome to have burning questions. I also just want to say that I am here if you need to talk as a follow-up, or if you would like some help adapting this, I'd be more than willing to do that, or whatever Zoom looks like. You know, I'm passionate about this, and I also would like to see it be able to work and implement in churches. So I'm more than welcome to hear feedback too. This would work, this doesn't work. Have you thought about this? I think that's great. It's words that need to be carried out, but I also think that words can be edited and changed. So, and part of that is we find as we do. So I'm more than welcome to do that. My information is on the curriculum, but please feel free to reach out at any point to talk further about it, and as well as just talking about service learning as a whole. You know, one of the things that Love Beyond Borders that Alex also brought up is that of what happens, you know, and I think it's really important to know that our young people and our children can contribute, and they can contribute with their prayers, they can contribute with their actions, and they can contribute with their voices. And I think that is one of the ways that our faith really goes into action, is by making sure that we know that God gives us a light so that we shine. And the best way that we can shine is by being who God created us to be. And so that is part of what this is really all about. We're here in part because of the people that we mentioned at the beginning. We're here because we had faith leaders who believed in us, who challenged us, who encouraged us to be more than we thought we could ever be. And so I think I return to that to be able to say, thank you for what you're doing. And please know that we're here as a resource in any way that we can. And if we don't know, we'll say, I don't know, but I will get back to you with what I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Courtney. And I appreciate your offer to be available to people and have a continuing discussion. You know, one of the things that we could do, it'd be very simple to do, is on our website under church resources, create a section for children and put the curriculum there. People could post questions. If people have some modifications, additions, and so on, they could post that. And I mean, we could create that in 5 minutes. And if people find it useful, great. And if not, that's okay too. But you know, that might be a good next step. And Emily, did I see you raising your hand?
Yeah, David, I just wanted to mention, we talked about resources on the website. One of the things that I did over the years of Imagine No Malaria was to put together a list of fundraising opportunities. So everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. Many of these were led by children. And I just want you to know that on David's website under the church resources, there is that list that was put together. We took the Imagine No Malaria out of it and just put all sorts of ideas from what our churches in Oregon, Idaho, and the Pacific Northwest did during Imagine No Malaria. So, and that's the list that can be added to at any time if you just want to share with either, get back to David or me, or we can add to that list if you have other ideas or you try new things. And if you do some fundraising in that kind of fun way, whether it's a rocking chair marathon or a car wash or a comedy show, let us know. So take some pictures so we can share those as well, because I think those are stories too. Once the kids get the sense about what this is all about and have their stories to share, they're going to want to raise money. We know that our churches raised money just through Christmas. $140,000 went to the advance. And to me, that was a pretty amazing amount for something that just started. Many of them, it was the Christmas Eve service or Giving Tuesday, giving, or just individuals going straight to Unicef with it, or straight to their conference treasurer, so or the advance. So I just want you to know that we're in this together. I mean, I see everybody's name here, and you are all now part of our partners. And whatever we can do to help you be successful in your setting. We don't have all the answers either, and we may need your help in doing some things. But I got to tell you, we want you to join us, and we want to support at the same time, support you in any ways that we can. So I'm going to go ahead and put my email in. Is that okay in chat? Okay.
Yeah, please do. And thank you for mentioning pictures, Emily. That's really a great idea. And if I can throw out one very quick idea. My wife, Andrea, and I have friends in Eastern Ukraine. And one of the things we've been doing is we've been having some kindergarten age and elementary school children drawing pictures about staying safe. Because right now our friends there are under tremendous stress, and as you can imagine, just really fearful about what's going to happen. But when they get these pictures, they have the sense of, gee, we haven't been forgotten. And they get some of those and they write us back and say, please keep doing that. It just really makes a difference. Mm-hmm. So yeah, kids can be a wonderful resource. Alex, you had your hand?
Yeah, I just want to mention that our interfaith partners are putting together a briefing for mid-February, likely going to be on the 16th or 17th in the evening. I'm sure, David, if you could share everyone's emails here who registered, I'd love to forward all of you the Zoom link for this webinar, because it will give everyone an update as to how the vaccine campaign is going. What are the short and long-term goals, and how everyone can get involved. Just to give you a sneak peek, UNICEF is setting itself to vaccinate 4.1 billion people this year, which will hopefully get us close to 70% of the world's population vaccinated. And we've already vaccinated over 1 billion people. And actually in a couple of weeks, actually in a month, it will be a year since we started vaccinating people through COVAX. So we'll be meeting that milestone as well. But we'd love to share that link with all of you. And as Emily said, it will be great to have you as partners in this campaign. Yeah. I'll also type my email if you would like to reach out to me.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for being here and participating in this. We're going to do a second round at an earlier time in about 2 weeks. And thank you, Courtney, for being willing to do that. And you are all on our email list. And so as events are coming up, we'll get an email out to you. And then also, if you take a look at the Facebook page and the website, we post things there pretty regularly. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here.